Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, the Executive Director of the American Constitutional Rights Union and the ACRU Action Fund. And welcome to another episode of Live Free TV, where we try to bring some of the critical issues to you with some of the top experts in the country to let you know and give you a call to action. We want to keep you better informed, educated, and activated. And without a doubt, as we begin to look at going into the next 2024 election cycle, now is the time when we need to be preparing and we need to apply the lessons learned that we have seen since 2020 to make sure that we have integrity in our electoral system. And I cannot think of anyone better to discuss this than Gina Swoboda, who is a dear friend of mine out there in Arizona, who has an incredible not-for-profit organization that she'll talk to us about that really deals with cleaning up voter registration rolls and all the behind-the-scenes machinations of it. So, Gina, thank you so very much, and thanks for being here on Live Free TV.
Thank you so much, Colonel West. It's great to be with you.
Well, tell us a little bit more about your organization, your 501c3, what you do, because I think it's phenomenal, all of the data that you have aggregated in that little beanie brain of yours. I mean, it's just incredible what you've been able to do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I run the Voter Reference Foundation, and we're a nonprofit. We're under the umbrella of a C4 of Restoration of America. And my mission at the foundation is to acquire the voter rolls from every state in the country and to publish them online for free for the public forever. And I have a little website, voteref.com, and we put up all the voter rolls with the chain of custody forms. We don't clean them up. We don't change them. It's exactly as we get them from the election officials. And we just keep adding new files as we go along.
What are some of the things that you have seen in aggregating that voter roll registration data that should cause people some concerns?
So the data is likely inaccurate in many cases. So, there are people registered in multiple locations that are showing that they're active. They appear to be the same person. That needs further research by the county clerks, the county registrars. There are people who, if a county clerk or a recorder or registrar, whatever it is in your jurisdiction, gets a voter registration application and they cannot read the date of birth, they have a habit of entering 1/1/1900. And you can understand when they're initially putting it in, okay, they're going to put a pause on that. Then they go back and fix it. They don't go back and fix it. So if you go to VoteRef and you're looking up voters and you sort by age, you're going to see a tremendous amount of people who look like they were born in 1900 and they're still voting. So that's a problem because we don't actually know who these people are. We have nursing care facilities with very high levels of voter registration where it appears that a person did not register to vote. And then at the age of 92, said, you know what, I've had enough, which is possible. But like I lived through Eisenhower and I lived through Carter, but I'm done now. I'm going to register now and suddenly start to vote. And again, these are things, it's not proof or evidence of fraud, but these are things that need further investigation and review so that we can confirm that everything is as it should be, that the data is accurate. You can't hold an election without 100% accurate voter rolls. That's where it begins with who's eligible. That's where it ends with who voted. You get a credit when you vote. So one of the things we do an analysis. We compare how many ballots were cast in a contest, like in a precinct, let's say Big Sky precinct, and then how many voters have credit in the Big Sky precinct for voting. And you have to get a snapshot of the file on election day. We learned that after about a year, because the election officials in every state except Ohio at this point, they're overwriting the file. They're writing over it over and over again every time something changes. So if you try to compare the apples and the files moving, now you're looking at apples and oranges. So we get the file, we send our records request and say, hey, when you get the file, hang on to a copy of that. We want a copy of that. And then we're actually comparing those two data sets. Voters move, voters get canceled. You back that out. But it's the data's off. And I feel, and I think many of the American people feel, that you as an election official should not certify a canvas, right? You're saying this
Yeah.
is the result. These are the votes. If it's inaccurate and the numbers aren't matching, you have a duty to go back to your
Hmm.
county or your jurisdiction and say, show us the data. And hopefully that's a public policy discussion we can have.
Now, what you're talking about is indicators and warnings. I mean, you're not making any, confirmed assessment, but what you're saying is that when you see certain trends, that should be a cause for alarm. And is there any other place in the United States of America that aggregates all of this voter registration roll data like yourself?
Not that provides it to the public. Public Interest Legal Foundation has done this research for a long time, and they do tremendous work in litigation, but they don't provide the information to the public. I know AFPI has started doing work looking at these discrepancies between the ballots and the voters, but they don't publish the data. As far as I know, we are the only organization that's publishing the data. And we've got 34 states and the District of Columbia live right now. And for the rest of the states, there are some blockers. So we're going to have to reach out to legislatures and see if they're willing to allow us to publish the data, modify statutes. And in some cases, we're going to have to litigate, because the National Voter Registration Act, which is federal law, says that the public has oversight of voter rolls.
Hmm.
And what does it mean in 2023 for the public to be provided with the data and to have oversight of the data? And I would posit that what that means is, as these tech companies tell us all the time, they think they should be exempt from some of these editorial, kind of limitations, because they
Yeah.
say, well, the internet's the public square. Okay, well, if the internet's the public square and these are public records, and the Congress, when they passed the NVRA, did not say you can't do this, you can't do this. The only thing they said what you can't do. They didn't say you can't publish it. So if a state comes in and says you can't publish it, I think they're going to run afoul of the supremacy clause. If the federal government already established rules around this thing, the state can't just suddenly add rules of their own.
And it's a constitutional rule that they have established. So no, the state would have to abide by it. And it kind of also lends itself to this question and this concern is, do you tend to believe that somehow there's in the big ethosphere up there, a means by which folks can plug in to some of these very questionable entities that are out there on voter registration rolls that have not been reviewed, have not been corrected? Can this thing be shifted across different states, maybe?
I think that there is a giant gaping hole in the integrity of the process of securing the election because the rolls are inaccurate.
Yeah.
And I think that we definitely saw a problem in 2020. We know that states that do not do vote by mail historically had no experience with the program. I always say under cover of COVID, right?
Hmm.
Just willy-nilly sent people mail ballots. And because
Yes.
they didn't have a program, it wasn't a secured process. And, tens of millions of ballots, there's estimates of like 90 million ballots, like
Hmm.
just kind of went out there and didn't come back.
Hmm.
And didn't there, there are no notices, right? Like, so
Hmm.
election mail by law in every state is non-forwardable. So these things shouldn't have gotten forwarded to anybody. They should have gone back or had an electronic report from the Postal Service back to the election official saying, hey, these people aren't here. If you have physical ballots just out there in the world and these states don't have experience with processing mail ballots, it's a risk. If you're doing threat assessment and risk mitigation, and this is a
Hmm.
core function of the government, right? I
Yeah.
always say, did not elect you to measure the temperature of the concrete outside the local college. Elected you to keep us
Yeah.
secure and run an
Yeah.
election, right? So this is a
Yeah.
core function. You've got to lock it down. It's a risk.
Well, let's talk about that because I think that's one of the critical things. A lot of people were confused because before 2020 COVID hit, we had never heard of anything called unsolicited mail-in ballots. Either you
Yep.
showed up at a polling location or you applied for an absentee ballot. Very clear, very understood. That was our processes and procedures. So the unsolicited mail-in ballots kind of lends itself to a lot of nefarious actions and activities, correct?
It does. And the Baker Carter Commission, was asked to look into what are the risks to the election system. And their initial report, they came back and said, well, something that's probably kind of flawed is voting by mail. Sending out mail ballots lends itself, to several problems. Now, some kind of left-leaning groups did a follow-up report to that. And I'm like, never mind. It's okay.
Nothing
now.
to see here.
Nothing to see here. Move along. When you just think about it on its face. So there was a time in the United States when we didn't have the secret ballot. And in some states that have a caucus system and not a primary system, they might be more familiar with what happens. Like if everybody's in the room and you say, if you like this candidate, stand over here. If you like this candidate, stand over here. You are subject to intimidation and threat because everyone knows who you voted for. And when that used to happen in this country, when we did not have the secret ballot, people could take your career from you. Yeah. Bad things can happen to you. So part of the issue, the risk of mail ballots is, I'm from New York City originally. If you have a person coming to knock on your door to say, hey, Jimmy, the mail ballots went out. Do you need help filling that out? I know you're on the list for a job. Like, this is not good. If you're, God bless people. There are people in like an address confidentiality program because they're victims of domestic violence. Do you not want to be able to go to a place where you're by yourself and no one can see who you're voting for so that you have your voice heard, so that you don't maybe have this person that might be, abusive telling you how you're going to vote? There's all kinds of reasons why. But yes, to me, the most secure way to vote, and I like to do it, is in person. Yeah. In person early is very convenient. I think that there's a compromise that can be reached. I do think that absentee ballots are necessary for some folks. We have folks,
the military
facilities, absolutely our military. Yeah. Yeah. We need to provide people with the ability to do that. But kind of willy-nilly out there, uncontrolled, without securing the voter rolls to make sure they're only going where they're supposed to, is an issue for sure.
How concerned are you when we are now looking at 5 to 7 million, I mean, maybe more, we don't know, illegals have come into this country, and we have folks that are out there talking about how they should get driver's licenses and things of this nature. How concerned are you that they will end up on voter registration rolls?
It's a huge problem. It's a known problem, and we have actual election officials in some cases contributing to the problem. So Colorado, Secretary of State Jenna Griswold sent out postcards to people asking them to register to vote, and she sent them to non-citizens. So, she's suborning felony activity when she does that. Yeah. And it's not good for these people, because if you came to this country and you're in this country and you hope to be a citizen someday, if you commit a felony, that's a bar to citizenship. So, if I'm sitting in my apartment and I get an invitation from an election official or from a private organization, right, asking me to register to vote, it's likely that I don't know what the rules are. And so, especially if English is my second language, right? So if I sign up to register to vote and then they're going to mail me a ballot and I don't know that I'm not supposed to vote, we have documented cases of non-citizens voting, and Public Interest Legal Foundation that we referred to earlier has done tremendous work in this area, where they have done public records requests and FOIAs. They have documents from the non-citizens writing to the election official, like, take me off. I'm not a citizen. And they just keep sending them like ballots and registering them. And that's also a problem with automatic voter registration. That's so true. If your state is just registering everybody that gets a driver's license,
motor voter law, correct?
From the motor voter, which is what NVRA, it's part of that. So if the state says we're going to do it automatically, everybody that comes here and applies for license, boom. If their systems aren't like really good, pinging to the DHS, Department of Homeland Security saved database will look to see if you're a citizen. If it's not like rock solid that it's going to ping back and say no and flag this person with like a type of license that's like an F or a different, the room there for error is huge. And in states where there's litigation where they're saying like you're somehow biased against people if you try to give them a different category of a license because they're a non-citizen. Now we're 100% off to the races. People that should not be eligible to vote are being asked to vote. And then if you try to prosecute those crimes, which we saw in Florida, where they set up an election integrity unit and they said, okay, these people shouldn't be voting. Some of them were felons. Some of them were non-citizens. Then the election official's position is, well, it's not our job. Yeah. And then the press said, well, it's not their fault. They sent them a ballot. Well, who's responsible? You know, when I was a kid,
yeah.
And I'll tell you, ignorance of the law was no excuse. If you inadvertently committed a felony because you didn't know it was still a felony, we don't want people to be harmed by what I would say. Look, over the last 20 years, it's not the job, in my opinion, of election officials to go out and register voters and increase turnout. Their job is to administer the election and administer the voter rolls. Political parties can go out, candidates can go out, third party groups can go out. Taxpayer money is not supposed to be spent to go increase voter registration. We've gone so far in the direction of kind of widening the franchise to every being, and that being the focus of the mission instead of securing the process and conducting the election, that we just have misplaced priorities. And we just shouldn't be spending money on that. We should be spending the money, the taxpayer money, on securing the system, keeping the rolls clean, and not endangering people and kind of suborning a vote from a person who is not eligible. That's not what everybody fought for.
Well, it would appear to me what you're articulating is that you have election officials, being it appointed or elected, that are out there and aiding and abetting felony activities. Am I correct?
Yeah, I can't say if they're doing it intentionally, but that's the effect. I mean, that's what happened in Colorado. Invitations to register to vote were sent to non-citizens. It's not in dispute. The Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, said, sorry. Oh, well,
Yeah.
Well, what if there hadn't been what if there hadn't been a public records request? What if we hadn't realized that was going on? Then those people are voting, and it's altering the effects of elections. How many close elections do we have to have? Every vote counts, right? We hear this mantra all the time. Yes, it does. Which is, these are close races. We need to have confidence in the system and know that the voices that are being heard with regard to casting a ballot are only the people that are eligible.
And you bring up a great point, because you would think that there's some type of background check system out there. One of the hot topics right now is the Form 4473 that you have to use to going through the NICS background check system when you're purchasing a firearm. Unless you're Hunter Biden, you can lie on it and not, get 5 years of felony offense. But, you would think that we'd have some type of background check as well when it comes to one of the most precious things that we are asking citizens to do, which is vote. And I think a dovetail off of this, when you talk about intentionality, how interesting it is during the census that the left does not want only U.S. citizens to be counted. They just want everybody, all the numbers to be counted. And so that's very dangerous for the apportionment of congressional districts. And it's also, I think, dangerous for voter registration rolls and things of this nature.
Yes. I mean, and I mean, we see the net outflow to states that, on a personal political level, I think have maybe not great policies, which is why people are fleeing, right? Taxpayers are fleeing. And so for those states to continue to support their gigantic social welfare programs, they need to have a net inflow, and they need that federal funding that goes with it. And so, yes, they get to the census. We have apportionment of congressional seats. They're losing congressional seats. So think about how these big blue states are losing congressional seats, even in an environment where they're counting non-citizens, and they're still net negative. So the same thing applies to your point. If you don't have a rock solid system, and it's up to the election officials in many cases. So your state election laws should be telling you what the requirements are for your election officials to verify voter registration eligibility. And on the voterreferencefoundation.com website, at the top of the red bar, I have a toolkit that says voter registration guide. So every single state in this country, we have every statute linked there for how voter registration works. So you can go and check, like Alaska, What are the rules? What is your election official checking? What database are they required by law that they shall, not that they may, because may and a token will get you on a bus. Shall, right? And
Yeah.
you need reporting to your legislature that has oversight. So I suggest that people make sure that not only does it have to say they shall check the DHS database, and if they cannot find proof of citizenship, then they shall send a notification to the applicant that you must submit proof of citizenship or you shall not be registered to vote. And then they should be required to report to the legislature how many letters did they send, how many people did they reject, how many hit pings did they put to these databases. That's just regular reporting that they could do every quarter. So the legislature would notice, hey, it looks like this is not happening. Why is this not happening?
Let's shift and get a little bit closer to your home there in Arizona and
Yes.
talk about Maricopa County, where we saw just an absolutely collapse on election day there. I think it's so important that we share lessons learned because it seems on the conservative side that we don't understand the time period in between election cycles. That's when you should really be preparing yourself and fortifying yourself on these issues. We just kind of wait until the next election cycle. What if you could condense it down to the layman's terms? What was the problem that happened on election day in Maricopa County, which is the most populous voter-based county in the state of Arizona?
It is. It's 70% of our voting base here in the state. So what happened on election day in Maricopa County was that the ballot on demand printers produced ballots that could not be read by the on-site tabulators.
Mm.
And as a result, so it's printing the ballot. So you walk in, scan your license, prints the ballot for where you live.
Mm-hmm.
This is the problem with the vote center model. We need to go back to precinct polling places so this stops happening. But those ballots, and Maricopa has since said, was the problem was the weight of the paper, and the ink didn't adhere properly. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for the purposes of the voter. You got a ballot. You tried to put it in, it spit it out. You tried 3 or 4 times upside down, it spit it out. Poll workers trained, print a new ballot. You do that 3 times. Now the line's growing.
Yeah.
Now they're saying to you, you know what, put it in door 3, and we're going to duplicate it back at central count. All will be well. Well, we've had 3 or 4 bad elections out here. And by bad election, I mean loss of confidence by the voters because of situations. So a lot of people weren't comfortable with that. And the lines were very long. And this started, by 8:30 in the morning, we had more than 30 locations down. Then we had 64 locations down. Then it was like 2/3 of the locations. So the county knew, and attorneys were calling and asking the county, hey, tell people that they can use the accessible voting machines. Have your marshal stand outside, your polling place worker, and let people know this tabulator's not working. If you don't want to put it in door 3, go somewhere else. They refused to do those things. We asked them to please keep the polling places open because people have to go to work.
Yeah.
Republicans were voting 3-1 over Democrats on election day in Maricopa County in the 2022 election. And that's because they were not feeling comfortable with the process, and they wanted to go and watch their ballot go in. We're never going to be able to identify X amount of voters gave up and walked away. But we know that there are people that have to work. I'm one of them that have kids that have responsibilities. You go to vote before work, big long line. You're like, okay. You try to go during lunch, big long line still because it's not fixed. Okay. You try to go after work, it's still a big long line. You're like, okay, you know what? I can't. I cannot go from place to place to place. I don't know where to go. There was no communication coming out. Go to this location. Go to this location. They weren't putting staff there telling people where to go. They didn't do the things, in my opinion, that they needed to do to mitigate the damage to the voters. That was a disaster. And this, in my view, comes down to the ballot on demand system. This is not the first time we've had this problem. In 2020, in 3 locations in the East Valley in Congressman Biggs' district, a similar thing happened in 3 vote centers. None of the ballots were going in. They were all having to put in door 3. In 2018, we had problems. And our then candidate for Maricopa County Recorder, Stephen Richer, who's now the recorder for Maricopa County, wrote a like a personal kind of audit report of what he thought went wrong in the 2018 election, and he noted that there were problems with former Recorder Fontes's ballot on demand printers. Recorder Fontes brought them in. He's now Secretary of State of Arizona.
Yeah,
he's doing it now. So Hans von Spakovsky, the very great Hans von Spakovsky of the Civil Rights, the voting division in the DOJ, used to be there for a long time, does tremendous work with Heritage to protect voters, always says the gold standard, right? 110% of the number of voters in the precinct, that's how many ballots you have to have available. Okay.
Yeah.
In a vote center model where you're not in your precinct, where you can just go anywhere, they can't have paper pre-printed ballots because they have no idea what race should be on there because they don't know where you're from. I could come from Scottsdale and go and vote in Thomas, and you don't know. That's why they use these ballot on demand printers. But the reason the county insists on using them is they don't want to keep the precinct polling places open because we've grown. Maricopa is, I would say, so big that they can't effectively run an election. And we had Senator Jake Hoffman ran a bill in our state legislature to break up Maricopa County, to make it, so you have the ability to run an election. And they fight that. The Association of Governments doesn't want the funding kind of split up. Well, if it's too big for you to put the number of precincts that it takes, and you insist on only having, like 235 vote centers for all of our millions of people to be able to go vote in, and use these printers that have not worked for 3 cycles in a row. We have had voters that can't tabulate on site because the ballot on demand printers are malfunctioning, long lines. All right. The attrition rate is probably quite high, although, we can't prove it. You need to go back to the precinct model. We had bills passed by our legislature this session. We tried to give them $10 million in one bill to add additional precinct polling locations. Tried to put into law that it's a holiday, a state holiday, so that we can go back to using the schools, because the schools don't want to be used anymore. Like, oh, it's controversial. So, but that's what's in your precinct is the school that you're paying taxpayers. So we said, okay, we'll give the schools the day off. Then they said, oh, well, you're going to make it harder for us to vote for our people that got to watch their kids. I'm like, so you shut down the schools.
I used to go with my mom and dad to the local high school because the school was out, and I stand there and watch them vote.
And it's
we've been there.
Civic duty. It's beautiful. But the people who shut the schools down for 2 years, right? The Chicago Teachers Union was like, it is racist to try to tell us that we should have to open up the school. And now, like in Arizona, they're like, it makes it too hard to vote. So it's basically, here's my assessment after a session of watching the legislature pass meaningful bills. They all got vetoed. The County Lobbying Association objected to everything we tried to do to make in-person voting better. And it is my personal opinion, after viewing no matter what kind of money we tried to give them or opportunity, and these are process-driven reforms, right?
Yes.
They don't want to make Election Day better. They want to go to all mail, okay? That is what I believe that they want. They would really prefer if all the ballots just came to them in the mail. Well, the voters of Arizona want the option and should have the option to go and vote in person. If you want to vote by mail in Arizona, God bless you, do it. I am in no way trying to discourage people. We want every vote in every method of voting that we can get.
But it has to be controlled. It has to be a process to it.
Secure, and the rolls have to be accurate. Otherwise, it's a mess, 100%. But we have the right to go and vote in person if that's what we want to do. And we can't be fish in a barrel, and they know, 3 out of 4 voters are going to be Republican and the printers are going to go down. They know they're going to go down. They keep going down. This technology is not capable. It kind of reminds me of like the battery that doesn't exist for solar. It's like, well, we're going to shut down the coal plants to force people to use green energy that doesn't provide enough energy to support people. We're going to shut down the precinct polling places to force people to try to go to vote by mail at vote centers. Right. And then the printers aren't going to work so that you can't actually vote. I mean, the technology is not there to do this vote center model yet in a consistent way where we don't have problems. Then you need to go back to having precinct polling places and pre-order pre-printed ballots so that this does not happen again. That's the simple solution. It just takes the will. They need the will to do it. And the voters need to hold them accountable.
Well, I got to tell you, anytime you see people that agree with chaos and confusion, that is intentional, and there is a nefarious design behind that. And I think that what was uncovered there in Maricopa County. If there are 2 nuggets that you can share with other counties all across the United States of America in preparation for the next election cycle? What are those two nuggets you could share?
So we need to verify that compliance exists in your county, right? So if you know what the rules are in your county for conducting the election, and you know what the statutes are, and you know that there's staffing available, you're good to go. In Maricopa, we have just a history of there are very clear statutory requirements. You've got to reconcile at the voting location on site how many ballots, how many voters. They didn't do it. They don't do it. They didn't do it. They haven't done it for at least 3 cycles. And their position is, well, we have fancy equipment that lets us do it back at headquarters. Well, when all these ballots and everything was failing and people were just putting things in the black bags and bringing the bags, it was chaos, to your point. And when you don't follow the law that is there for a reason to ensure the quality and the controls, right? To your point earlier, control of the process is in place. Then if there is chaos, there's room for bad things to happen. So people need to know what are the rules that are in place for the election, and are they following them, and have they followed them? And then if they haven't, you need to go to your elected officials and have them make these county election officials comply with the statutes, or tell them the reason why.
You know, it seems so simple because what you and I are talking about is not some hard to conceive thing about algorithms and all of this type of stuff. We're talking about processes and procedures. We're talking about following the law. We're talking about mitigating risks. We're talking about control mechanisms. We're talking about rehearsing. We're talking about doing all the things that we had to do in the military before we go into a training operation or a combat operation, definitely. And so it's just so perplexing to me that we have this thing called the elections in the United States of America. And it seems we purposefully don't want to have these measures in place. We don't want to follow laws and processes and procedures. So what, should we just have red counties that just should sit down and maybe come together and start to get these things implemented? Because a blue county is not going to do it. They're going to follow right along. But is there a blueprint? Is there a recipe? Is there something that can be printed out and sent to all red counties in the United States of America that says, here's the gold standard. This is what you should be doing?
Yes. So I nerd out. I love this. This is like all I think about all day.
Well, that's why you and I get along together. I mean, we're both kind of like nerds.
That's right.
Yeah.
So on the voterreferencefoundation.com site, like up at the top in the red bar, there's a election operations scorecard. There's a data transparency scorecard, and it ranks every state, like these processes. Do you have unmanned drop boxes? Not good. Do you have same-day voter registration? Not good. Do you have voter ID? Great. On data, does the data in your state, is it available for the public? It costs $36,000. In Virginia, the data is $20,000 for every file. Do we think that's accessible to the public? Ohio, Frank LaRose, the Secretary of State of Ohio, just produced the Data Act that's in their budget to make these snapshots available. So we know what works. Florida cleaned up a lot of their process. Broward was a mess.
I lived in Broward. I know.
Well, there you go. Yes, exactly.
Brenda Snipes,
Brenda Snipes, right? So Clark County, like in Nevada, had a problem. Maricopa County seems to have a problem. So one of the key things is know who are the officials that are making these decisions, and then how do they attain that office. So in Arizona, in the 2024 cycle, all county elected officials are on the ballot. The boards of supervisors in Arizona determine the election processes under the law. So like the law might say, you have to have an election, you have to have these locations open on this day. Then the county board of supervisors they appoint the elections director. That person is choosing whether to have vote centers or precincts. So the voters have to go and put people in office and ask them when they're running, do you support the vote center model? Do you support ranked choice voting? What are you guys doing? And get seats on those boards or with those people to make sure these are the people that you want that are putting the process together. Then you take your best practices. You take for example, Florida, people say to me all the time, Gina, Florida has more a higher population, they also have vote by mail. Why is it different? Some people think it's different that Florida's tabulating those mail ballots right away. That's not why. Arizona doesn't have early voting. We have 27 days of early vote by mail. If you go to a location in the state of Arizona for those 27 days of early voting, they hand you a ballot and an envelope. They want everything to be vote by mail. In Florida, if you go in early voting, they hand you a ballot, you put it in the machine, it's counted, you're done. So you need to really understand your process. Yes, Ohio's got a gold standard. Florida's got a gold standard. I want to take the things that improved Florida and implement them in Arizona. And we've tried through our legislature, and the election officials are just like, no, no, no. And then all the bills are vetoed. So the irony, of course, the catch-22 is we've got to get the people elected to change things to where we think there are gaps. And to do that, we've got to clean up the voter rolls, make sure these people that are running to have oversight over elections in any way, whether it's your board of supervisors or your clerk, your registrar, those people are elected in many cases, your recorder. Make sure that they are answering these questions and committing to it. And if not, you've got to get someone in that seat. Then you can implement, then you can have public comment period. Then you can look at what's working and what's not. Because to your point, you're 100% right. Where we can do it, let's do it. Let's show the gold standard. Let's set the example. And to do that, we have to have people in authority over those decisions.
You're absolutely right. And so let's conclude on this issue. We just had an incredible Supreme Court decision that came down, and it's not a real sexy decision. Maybe a lot of people just, don't even care about it. And that's one of the problems we have is complacency and apathy in this country. Yeah. But it's the Moore versus Harper decision. And basically what it is saying is that the federal government can overrule state legislatures when it comes to some of their, voting and election processes, laws, things of that nature. And what they quoted was based upon this, and I'll read from my Constitution here, Article 1, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. And people, once again, this is why you should have your own Constitution. You can see mine is highlighted. Mm-hmm. But it says here, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. Now, what this whole case was about was challenging a redistricting in, I believe it was Alabama. Correct me if I'm wrong.
North Carolina.
North Carolina, that's it, North Carolina. And so now what they're trying to set as a precedent is that the federal government can come in and overrule states and, nationalize elections almost. And now they're talking about, pushing the John Lewis, Voter Freedom Act or whatever, which it tells states and it tells counties you can't do voter registration roll review and some of these other things that the left wants to do. How dangerous is this Supreme Court decision, especially when you consider, Gina, it's a 6-3 conservative, quote unquote, court, but you had Chief Justice Roberts, you had Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett voting with the three leftist judges, Kagan, Sotomayor, and Brown Jackson.
Yes. And I encourage everybody to read Justice Thomas's dissent, because as usual, it's brilliant. There are two parts of that section of the Constitution that people look at. There's the elections clause and the electors clause. And what the Supreme Court was reviewing here is the elections clause. And you nailed that section. It appears, according to a just black and white reading of the Constitution, to give state legislatures plenary authority over the time, place, and the manner of choosing, right? What the Supreme Court ruled in Moore v. Harper was that it does not overcome a state court's interest in a congressional election, because they were looking at a congressional map, right? So it's a federal contest on a state ballot. And the state legislature of North Carolina said, these are the districts. This is how we're dividing up everybody to hold our election. And the Supreme Court has ruled that the state legislature does not have, plenary doesn't mean what plenary says. Plenary means unquestioned
Yeah.
100%. It's your authority. Nobody can think about it. The
Yeah.
Supreme Court saying, yeah, actually, the state court, because in the case of Moore v. Harper, the North Carolina Supreme Court overruled what the legislature did. That's how this case, and that court has now flipped back and kind of reversed itself.
Yeah.
But for every other state, they're saying that, in fact, state courts can review within the confines of the state constitution whether or not they think what the legislature did holds water in a congressional race. They're saying give deference to the legislature, but you still get to decide if it's constitutional. The outcome of this, I think, and Justice Thomas thinks, is going to be a lot of cases, a lot more election cases that are going to keep going up through the courts, and one might expect that things might get a little more chaotic than we already thought they would be in the 2024 cycle, because we have ongoing issues. A lot of people were really putting their faith in this decision was going to come back establishing what to many of us the Constitution of the United States already appeared to say, that the legislatures do have plenary, unquestionable, unoverrulable authority to determine these things. The Supreme Court saying within the bounds of the state constitution in congressional elections. I think we're going to have a lot more cases. I agree with Justice Thomas. This seems to have opened a door to more confusion rather than just, saying this is what the United States Constitution says, that therefore this is what it means. They're saying that the state constitution has authority over what the state legislature is doing with regard to congressional elections. That is what they have said here. And so if you're in a state, Wisconsin, for example, the balance of the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, the last election, it flipped. So if the legislature has put in place things like with our vulnerable voters in the nursing care facilities, you cannot, if you were a worker in a nursing care facility, you can't help the patient fill in the ballot because you have undue influence and coercion. And the Wisconsin Elections Commission in 2020 ignored that under COVID. Oh, no, we're just going to do it anyway. Well, if they start to do that again now, and people try to say, well, that's not what the legislature said. The legislature said you can't do that. And then they go to the state Supreme Court. Now, under the Moore v. Harper ruling, the state Supreme Court can say, well, we find this vague section of the state constitution means you can't do that, legislature. And now you're going to, have to try to appeal. And the Supreme Court in 2020 wouldn't take Ken Paxton's case in Texas. Where,
absolutely.
They were the court of original jurisdiction. Texas,
absolutely.
Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 2020, in Ken Paxton's view and other states' view, diluted the electors of the other states by not following what their own
election law
constitution and what their own legislature said. So this seems at first reading to open the door to more of that kind of activity, which is unfortunate.
And the thing in 2020, I mean, in Georgia, you had the Secretary of State going to a consent agreement with a nobody, Stacey Abrams. That was you're not supposed to be able to do that. Even here in Texas, our governor, increased early voting by a week. He changed election law, not through the legislature. So what seems to be troubling for me is that the left always runs to the courts. And that's why courts are so important. And that's why I'm kind of disappointed in this ruling that came down from the Supreme Court, because, again, it's a usurpation of the state legislatures. I mean, that's where they have this enumerated power, but now we're trying to take it away from them and shift it over to state courts. And if anything, it may end up going into a federal court. As you say, it gets ties up in this process. Look, Gina, I tell you what, I love sitting down and talking to you about this stuff. When I'm out there in Arizona, you and I have a lot of great conversations. But where can people follow you? Where can people support what you're doing and help you out? And where can they can learn more about how they can make an impact in their respective counties and states?
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the work you do so much. And we're all very blessed to have you and to have ACRU. I am at voterreferencefoundation.com, and you can email info, INFO, at voterreferencefoundation.com. You can look up voter registration information on voteref.com. And I'm actually checking to see what the Twitter handle is, because Twitter, believe it or not, under its prior leadership has deactivated my Twitter handle. It's at vote reference. So if you want to follow us on Twitter, it's at vote reference. And since Elon took over, they have not deactivated us. So I'm hopeful we can keep that going. Thank you. And thank you to your audience. We're only going to do this if we're all awake and kind of working together, and do it with prayer. Because at the end of the day, God's in control. But
He is in control.
We've got to act. Thank you so much, Colonel West.
Thank you, Gina. And let me tell you something. If there's one person that, if there was a national election supervisor position, you should be it, because there's no one else in this country that understands the inner workings of election integrity like you do. Not this mythical stuff about algorithms, but just the nuts and bolts, processes, procedures, laws, and regulations. That's you. And I'm honored to call you friend, Gina. So thank you very much for being with us on Live Free TV.
Thank you. God bless you. God bless America.
Yes, ma'am.